Stories shape how we see the world. Voice of Witness is an award-winning oral history nonprofit harnessing the transformative power of storytelling. We work with individuals and communities impacted by injustice, helping them document their lived experiences through oral history, telling their own stories in their own words. In an era of reductive sound bites, we need this kind of nuanced grassroots storytelling to create a more just future. Visit voiceofwitness.org/learn to get involved, check out our workshops, and download tools to support your own project. Join us in building a more connected world, one story at a time.
The first 100 days of a new presidential administration have the potential to be the most impactful.
Campaign promises and concepts of plans begin to take shape and become reality.
I'm Sarah.
And I'm Beth.
Together, we host Pantsuit Politics, a podcast where we take a different approach to the news.
Join us for this different approach where we ask questions, resist hot takes, and have fun no matter what the world serves up.
We'll get you through the first 100 days and beyond of the new Trump administration. Stay informed without all the anxiety.
Join us for new episodes every Tuesday and Friday wherever you get your podcast.
Lemonada. Hello and welcome to Good Things. I'm your host, Gloria Riviera. In 2024, the U.S. Surgeon General declared gun violence a public health crisis and the leading cause of death among children and adolescents. The solution? Many organizations across the country have found the solutions within communities themselves, from people who have lived experience with violence. Today, we're joined by two leaders who are transforming how we think about preventing gun violence in our own neighborhoods. DeVone Boggan is the executive director of Advance Peace, an organization that uses community-led strategies to reduce gun violence. We also have Timmeka Perkins, senior associate at the Annie E. Casey Foundation. They're here to share what works when it comes to creating safer communities. We'll get into the data behind their success, learn about the heroes working on the front lines of violence intervention and prevention, and why investing in this issue helps everyone, families, businesses, and schools, to thrive. Timmeka and DeVone, welcome to Good Things.
Hi there.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm okay. Listen, I gotta say, I have a kid with flu A, one floor below me. Do not get flu A is all I have to tell you. It is not pretty. But the topic that we're going to speak about today made me think that I do not want to put this off a moment longer.
We appreciate you.
I appreciate you, as does Lemonada. Welcome to you both. Thank you both for joining us on Good Things. DeVone, I want to start with something you said back in 2021. And my guess is that you've said something to this effect many times in many ways. You said, we're losing greatness and somebody has to do something. What did that mean at the time? And what does it mean today?
It means the same thing. I mean, we're losing young men at crazy rates who I can imagine have solutions and answers to some of the problems that we have in society. And in that regard, we're losing greatness. Every one of the young men that we get an opportunity to engage, to welcome into our lives and have an opportunity to be welcomed into their lives, it becomes very clear very quickly that there is greatness within them. And when they die prematurely, the world is missing out on that greatness being manifested.
Can you share a memory, recent or from your many years of work in this field, that made you feel like, yes, someone, maybe that was you, maybe that was a colleague, was doing something, and it is perhaps a memory that you carry with you to remind you of the work that you do?
Absolutely. I went through a difficult period after becoming neighborhood safety director in the city of Richmond. 8 months in, I lost my own brother to gun violence. And, I didn't have to do the work that I was doing. I was asked to do it. There was nothing driving me to the work at that particular time, other than understanding and appreciating that Black and brown boys dying on American streets was not normal, and it certainly wasn't acceptable. But having lost my brother in dramatic form, you finally now have access to what it looks like, what it feels like to be the very people you've been called to serve here. That has driven me. That has driven me so much through a lot of difficult times, particularly in those first 3 to 5 years of being neighborhood safety director in the city of Richmond, California.
Right, Timmeka, I heard him say just then, you can be the very people you've been called to serve. When you suffer a loss like that, it immediately removes a layer between yourself and the community that you're working on behalf of. Does that resonate with you? I lost my own brother to addiction, and my world changed. My worldview changed after he was gone.
Yes, it resonates with me more than you know. This was not the path that I thought that I would be on, either in the work that I did prior to coming to Casey or now. I thought I was going to be a teacher, which is a great profession, or a social worker, also a great profession. But it was actually a call from behind the wall from a friend who was incarcerated and possibly never coming home that said, hey, you're out there, you're alive, you're free, you have an opportunity. What are you doing to help us, help people like us have a better life? And so it was at that point in my career that I completely switched gears and began working in the diversion space, the community violence intervention space, and completely dedicated my life to this. Could not see myself doing anything else.
Timmeka, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Timmeka, I also know from our quick conversation earlier, the way in which you speak about community violence intervention, you do so in such a professional sense. And so I think for our listeners, it would be helpful to begin at the beginning. What do you mean when we use that phrase, community violence intervention? How do you define that?
So one thing that I want to note, this is work that has been going on for decades. This is work that predates my existence on this earth. We're just now naming it. And naming it is important because it gives us a shared goal to wrap around, and it gives us some shared language, which helps in the work. There's a whole host of strategies that fall under community violence intervention: hospital-based programming, violence interruption, street outreach. All of those terms fall under the umbrella, but it's really 3 main pillars that I uplift when it comes to like these 3 things have to be a part of the programming. And that's going to be first, engagement with participants at highest risk for involvement in gun violence, either victimization or as the shooter. I think once you have those participants identified, the other main pillar is that community violence intervention is inclusive of those with lived experience and credibilities in the communities that they serve. And that puts them not only in a unique position to identify those at highest risk, but also once they're identified to really reach them because they've walked in their shoes. They have the trust of the community. And so there's a comfort level in sharing information before an incident breaks out, but also a trust to be able to meet people where they are, understanding the thought process that therefore can be changed to prevent a retaliation violence or to prevent violence from occurring in the first part. The other piece of it is that these programs are based on research. They're data driven. Those are evidence informed strategies that both intervene in the short term when a conflict arises or is on the horizon, but also gets to the root causes of violence. And so a community violence intervention program is going to have all of those components, really going to work with participants and communities to kind of change the norms, change the thought processes and the behaviors. And so while the strategies differ and the models differ, those 3 components have to be a part of it.
Right. DeVone, one of the things that I found interesting when researching the data is both the way in which you've cited data from the beginning and the numbers. I was one of those people having covered places such as Ferguson, Missouri, and Baltimore. I'm based in Washington, D.C. I'm familiar with the idea that gun violence can feel like it's everywhere, but it's not perpetrated by everyone in a community. And I think there's a number, something like in your initial research in the city of Richmond, what was it? The number 17 is coming to mind. 17 people were directly involved in 70% of the gun violence in that area. Is that correct? You're nodding your head.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah. So in 2009, the city of Richmond experienced 45 firearm-related homicides and nearly 290 non-fatal shootings where bullets actually ended up in bodies, but folks survived that trauma. Early 2010, I'm sitting in a room with a variety of law enforcement agencies working gun crimes in the city of Richmond. And note that the city of Richmond at that time is just above 100,000 people in terms of population size. And I'm listening to these law enforcement agencies at the federal, state, regional, and local levels talk about the 2009 activity in the city of Richmond. And I hear a common theme continue to come forward, and that's 17 people being responsible for 70% of this violence. Now, understand, at that time, I'm being told locally that there are about 300 people involved.
Wow.
And yeah,
300.
Yeah. And so that I needed to really concentrate our efforts on. And when I heard this number, I asked the law enforcement officer who had invited me to listen in if he would get me the list from each of the agencies of the 17 people they thought were most responsible. So I get the list. I get about 7 lists, and I realize that there are different names on each of the lists, but 17 people nonetheless. And after looking at the list thoroughly, I came to understand that there were actually 28 unduplicated names. And so I took those 28 unduplicated names back to our office and told them, this is early January 2010, told them I'm giving you 3 months to convince these 28 individuals to come to sit down with us at City Hall. And we're going to have a proposition for them. Now, the question for my team was, well, what's the proposition going to be? And I told them, I'm going to take 3 months to figure that out. Now, we lost 3 of those individuals within 90 days of having the conversation. So we had 25 folks that we invited. Within 3 months, my team convinced 21 of the 25 to come to City Hall. And that began the change that Richmond has now experienced over the last 17 years.
What does it look like when one approaches someone, one of those names on that list, and tries to convince them to come to City Hall for a conversation? What do you say, and how do you convince a person to take action to say, okay, I'll come hear what you have to say?
Well, I probably can't curse on here, but I tell you, it's some cursing, it's some rage, it's some resentment, it's some suspicion, it's skepticism, it's get the out of my face with that peace stuff. And what is required is someone who's willing to court. I want the audience to think about this. When you want someone in your life, when you want to be a part of someone's life, you're willing to court them. You're willing to think about them even when they're not around. You're willing to chase them. especially when they run from you. You're willing to chase and you're willing to cater to them. And that's what it's about. It's not so much about what one says. It's about what one does every single day to convince the individual that you're courting, chasing, and catering to that there's no angle. I just want to see you live. That's the only interest I have. And if I can be a part of making sure that happens with you and your involvement, I want to be.
We're going to take a quick break, but we will be right back with more on Good Things.
Interested in the power of first-person storytelling? The Voice of Witness book series documents the oral histories of people directly impacted by and fighting against injustice. Each collection supports historically excluded communities to tell their own stories in their own words. The books feature a diversity of voices, including those of refugees and immigrants, incarcerated people, communities displaced from public housing, farm workers, indigenous peoples, and more. These powerful stories highlight crucial issues and expose the impacts of harmful narratives and policies, laying the groundwork to build solidarity and movements for change. Voice of Witness books are read and used by thousands of educators, organizations, and advocates across the country each year. Visit voiceofwitness.org/read to learn more, access free resources, and get involved.
This message is brought to you by Cologuard, a non-invasive colon cancer screening test. Did you know that colon cancer is considered the most preventable yet least prevented cancer? When caught at early stages, colon cancer is survivable in 90% of people, so screening and early detection are key to reducing overall colon cancer deaths. That's why the American Cancer Society recommends that if you are at average risk, you begin screening for colon cancer at age 45. And a convenient way to do that is with the Cologuard test. The Cologuard test is delivered to your door and allows you to feel more in control of your colon cancer screening and do it on your own schedule, with none of the prep that is required of a colonoscopy. Plus, the Cologuard test is affordable. Most insured patients pay $0, and if a follow-up colonoscopy is needed, this is covered by most insurance plans. So, if you're 45 or older and at average risk, ask your healthcare provider about screening for colon cancer with the Cologuard test. You can also request a Cologuard prescription today at Cologuard.com/podcast. The Cologuard test is intended to screen adults 45 and older at average risk for colorectal cancer. Do not use a Cologuard test if you have had adenomas, have inflammatory bowel disease, and certain hereditary syndromes, or a personal or family history of colorectal cancer. The Cologuard test is not a replacement for colonoscopy in high-risk patients. Cologuard test performance in adults ages 45 to 49 is estimated based on a large clinical study of patients 50 and older. False positives and false negatives can occur. Cologuard is available by prescription only.
We're talking about all this in the context of your organization, Advance Peace. And you're talking about those on your staff who are assigned to go make that connection. And when you just described the initial reaction, lots of curse words, get out of my face, what I'm hearing is that's just the protective layer.
Yes.
That's what the person is doing because that's what keeps them safe in that environment. So to be able to build a team of people you trust who can see that, who are not intimidated by that in the slightest.
That's right.
And have the persistence to keep coming back with a relatively simple message. I want to see you live.
That's it.
Who are these neighborhood change agents, the NCAs that you mentioned? How do you find them? How do they get involved? What is it about someone that makes you think they could do this?
Yeah. Well, funny story. For me, it became clear that we wanted folks that lived in those neighborhoods, came from those neighborhoods, or had a common lived experience with those who were at the center of gunfire. And so I introduced this idea to the city manager, the human resources director, and the city attorney by way of saying, I believe we should hire formerly incarcerated individuals with gun charges in their backgrounds. Now, let me tell you the looks that I got from the human resources director and the city attorney. The city manager didn't give me a funny look. He never did. But he would always whisper in my ear, it better work. And we're fortunate that it actually worked.
I mean, it actually worked. The numbers are, I had to read them a couple of times because the drop in gun violence, I want to use the phrase, was astounding. And one of the things that I found really interesting is that there is some work to be done between the neighborhood change agent and the fellow. And that is one of those things, I should say, is creating a life map.
Yes.
What is the life map and how did that come together?
Well, if you look at every one of the 7 touch points of this 24-month Peacemaker Fellowship that we offer, it's an offer to the active firearm offender. Each one of these touch points is what folks like you and I have probably had access to throughout our growth and development process. That's where that life map came from. It's like these guys have no sense of tomorrow because no one is helping them have a sense of tomorrow. You gotta have a sense of something else before you can actually get to something else. And so the life map was all about, yes, let's with them develop goals for their lives that are incorporated throughout every segment of their life. But most importantly, let us do something that gets them to think beyond this week, next month, next year. The moment we can get them to think that way, the moment their lives began to take that path. And so at the very base of this was just that.
Yeah, and I love the idea that we're talking about things as simple as actually a driver's license or a social security card. Like, let me go get these things that make me feel I've accomplished something out in the world.
Gloria, and it's, you name the 2 things. Getting a driver's license, particularly when you've been driving forever without one, or you get a social security card, or, hey, one of the first things, here's something for you. One of the first life map goals that is on every fellow's life map is obtaining a passport. Now, think about that for a second. A passport. Now, what the hell is a passport is what most of these guys are asking. And why do I need one? Well, there is a touch point called transformative travel. And that means we are right now planting the seed by way of you achieving this goal that you're leaving the country. You're leaving the country. And guess what? Right now you say you're not going to leave the country because it requires you to travel with your enemy, who's also a fellow. But by God, a little more time with us, you're going to be ready to say, yeah, I'm ready to leave the country. You are leaving the country. So that's a great example of setting the temperature. You setting the temperature by saying you're getting a passport. Why? Because you're going to leave the country. No matter what you think, you leaving the country.
And I'm also thinking about, you cited a number that a high percentage of the initial fellows were projected to possibly lose their lives in the next 6 to 12 months. And, I'm thinking of getting to that 6-month mark and looking at everyone and saying, okay, we're still here. We're still on this path. Timmeka, when we talk about the success Advanced Peace has had in Richmond and 16, 17 other cities now, I want to know what gives you hope about where this is all going, about the trajectory of community violence intervention. Things look like they're moving in the right direction. How much more work do you think can be done and can be accomplished?
So whenever I think about kind of the state of the field and I think about all of the major progress that we've made, we're seeing national reductions to the tune of 12%. 12% last year. So for perspective, that's about 1,500 lives. And you guys already shared DeVone's quote, who, when I speak, I normally share that quote because we're literally losing greatness. So I'm going to pivot to another great in the CVI space. His name is Tenny Gross. And I paraphrase him, but it's inspired by him. What if the cure for cancer died by gun violence? What if the cure for cancer died in the Department of Corrections, right? When you sit with that and you realize that we have 1,500 more opportunities to find a solution to the problems that we're all struggling with because of this work, I'm like super excited, like, let's go. But then the funder in me also sits back and realizes we're not even working at the scale of the problem. We are seeing these gains and these victories, and programs are still not fully resourced, right? There's still not this sustainable funding allocation. There's still not all of those things. What if we got to that point? What if we had these programs moving to scale? What would it look like? How amazing could it be? And so I grapple with it like, yes, let's celebrate, because every life saved is 100% worth doing this work. And I don't think that there is a single frontline worker or anyone that is engaged in this work that doesn't feel that way. But what does it look like if we have these comprehensive ecosystems everywhere? What does it look like if we have community-based organizations doing this work everywhere? Not only what does that look like with gun violence and lives saved, but what does that look like as far as the economy, as far as business? When you look at all of the interplay of all of these dynamics, we could be looking at thriving communities and healed people and thriving businesses. Like, the impact of gun violence is devastating, but the impact of peace is amazing.
Okay, sit tight, everyone. We're going to take one more quick break, and we'll be right back with more good things.
This is an ad by BetterHelp. Think about your mentors and idols, the people who inspire you the most. While it may look like they have all the answers, they don't. But they do know when to ask questions and seek the support they need. In a world that glorifies hyper-independence, it's easy to forget that we're all better with a support system behind us. Therapy is a great way to invest in yourself and find a consistent source of support in your life, so you can break free from the outdated belief that seeking help is a sign of weakness. BetterHelp has experienced therapists ready to help you with challenges ranging from anxiety and depression to relationships and stress. It's convenient, too. You can join a session with a click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy life. And you deserve that. You can even send your therapist a message anytime something comes up. Build your support system with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com.
Hi, I'm Emily Deschanel.
And I'm Carla Gallo, and we're here to bring you
Boneheads, the official Bones Rewatch podcast.
That's right. We're watching all the episodes of Bones, starting with episode 1, and we are the right people to do it.
I played Dr. Temperance Brennan, and I met Carla 16 years ago on set.
I played Daisy Wick.
Tune in every Wednesday to hear all our behind-the-scenes stories, conversations with cast and crew, and our favorite moments.
Boneheads from Lemonada Media is out wherever you get your podcasts.
Switching to a call for action, this work needs to be supported, and it needs to be supported financially, right? This doesn't come out of thin air. In terms of that financial support, how much of that is the biggest challenge that you face now, DeVone, after doing this work for over 15 years? Is supporting the program the biggest challenge, or one of many?
You know, it's one of many. And I think the big challenge is still so many people don't know about the work. We need the public sector, public or government, that's where the money is. That's where the resources are. We need for that sector to really dig in here. And it's difficult for that sector to do that when the constituencies, the people in those very communities impacted by gun violence, believe it or not, still believe that law enforcement is the end-all be-all to the challenge. And so I think the greatest challenge, which is tied to resource allocation, is more and more people not only need to know what CVI or community violence intervention is, but they also need to know just how impactful it is.
DeVone and Timmeka, do you both, when we talk about the broader population not knowing about this work, DeVone, I suppose this is for you. Is it a worry that, the impact of this work has to reach people who may not have experienced the loss that motivates, say, your NCAs, your neighborhood change agents? How do we bring this story and make it relevant, not only for resource allocation, but for broader support to those who might not have experienced this directly?
Yeah, I think we've got to find a way to mainstream it more. We've got to get it. We've got to get people talk about narrative change, but we've actually got to get the work out into our mainstream media. When you think about, and again, I take a look at law enforcement, I take a look at fire, I take a look at nursing, I take a look at all of these things. There's a lot of mainstream mediums out there that promote and share the stories of that in prime time, right? I think that's one of the things that CVI has to become incorporated into the mainstream media. It's also got, and this is all simultaneously, we've got to stop talking about it as a program. It is a public safety, public health strategy. It is a viable public safety tool, mechanism. Until we get away from, it's a nice little program we should do, it's a charitable thing to do, and we're going to be stuck right here, pigeonholed in the spaces that we're in.
Yeah. And when you have the U.S. Surgeon General declaring gun violence as a public health crisis,
exactly,
that's your starting narrative point right there.
Yes.
Timmeka, when we talk about the communities that have less violence, the benefits that ripple out from that in so many directions are vast. Can you just touch briefly on how the work impacts, basically everything? I'm thinking about, local businesses to schools and the broader community as well.
Yeah, Gloria. So when you were mentioning people not recognizing that they're being impacted, I thought immediately of the Surgeon General's declaration, because there was a data point in there that sticks with me all of the time. It was 54% of Americans have either directly or indirectly via a family member have been impacted by a firearm-related incident. And so that number alone, 1 in 2, regardless of community, has been impacted. I think the other piece of it is the economy. So when you talk about trickle-down effects, there have been studies that have shown the impact on things like businesses. So for every 10 fewer incidents of gunfire, so not necessarily homicides, just incidents of gunfire in Washington, D.C., it was found that was associated with 1 new business opening, the creation of 20 more jobs associated with businesses, about $1.3 million in sales increase, and 1 less business closure.
Wow. To wrap up, I have a question for both of you. I wish we didn't have to wrap up. This has been an incredible conversation. I'd love to hear from you first, DeVone. After everything we've talked about today about the impact and the importance of community violence intervention, what do you want people to know about where we are? What's at stake? And what can they do to help?
Well, I think we're better organized than we've ever been. as a sector. We're more professional than we've ever been as a sector. More and more and more of those on the front lines are being trained at a high level so that they can perform at a high level over a long period of time. And we've still got a lot more work to do. This is about communities taking responsibility for coming up with the solutions that they in the community need, and also taking responsibility for facilitating the work involved to achieve optimal outcomes around those solutions. Right now, we could take 4 years step back if we don't find ways, particularly at the federal level, to maintain a commitment to resourcing this at a level that is required. And that requires that American people say to the powers that be in their local communities, at the state level, and at the federal level, we want more investment and continued investment in community violence intervention. It's got to happen. It's got to happen. It's not only saving lives, it's changing lives, and it's doing it, to Timmeka's point, with great cost benefit.
I wish everyone could have that whisper in their ear, this better work, and the answer, it will.
Yes.
That's what your work has shown, is that it will. For you, Timmeka, what's at stake right now, and what can listeners do to help?
I don't think I can express what's at stake any better than DeVone already has. But I do have a very real call to action to funders and decision makers. We got to show up. My call to action is very directly tied to what DeVone said his city manager said to him and gave him, right? He gave him trust. He gave him flexibility to be innovative. And then I'm going to add an asterisk to that. It better work. It better work asterisk in that when you recognize how deep these root causes are embedded into communities, we have to increase our risk tolerance for how long it's going to take and what it looks like, right? This was not a year turnaround. DeVone gave those stats in 5 years with resources, with scaling, with all of those things. So we have to increase our risk tolerance. We have to trust the folks on the ground that are telling us what is going on. We have to trust them to innovate. We have to trust them and be flexible. And the other part about it is DeVone said this only works with the right people, right? So we have to make sure that this funding is not only available, but it's accessible to the folks who are doing the work. We have to make sure that these programs are not just resourced to function, but we have to make sure that our staff people and our organization have access to equitable pay and to the resources necessary to keep them physically and mentally well and have the respect for them, and show up and be willing to support them. And that means dollars. It also means flexibility. Because they're showing up every day to save other people, we got to make sure that they're propped up as well.
Those ideas of support and trust, so critical to this entire conversation. I have to thank you both for your time today, for the work that you do. Thank you for joining us on Good Things.
Thank you, Gloria.
Thank you.
This episode was made possible with support from the Annie E. Casey Foundation. Learn more at aecf.org. Views expressed in this episode are solely those of the participants. Thanks for listening to Good Things. I'm your host, Gloria Riviera. This series is produced by Hannah Boomershine, Lisa Fu, and Aria Bracci. Our supervising producer is Muna Danish. Mixing and sound design by Noah Smith. Jackie Danziger is our VP of Partnerships and Production. Production support from Maggie Kraushaw. Executive producers are Stephanie Whittles-Wax and Jessica Cordova-Kramer. Help others find our show by leaving us a rating and writing a review. Follow Good Things wherever you get your podcasts and listen ad-free on Amazon Music with your Prime membership. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week.
This message is sponsored by Cologuard.
Let's talk about colon cancer screening. I know a lot of you might hear that and instantly think about the drama of a colonoscopy. Taking time off work, drinking loads of prep liquid, undergoing an invasive procedure, fun stuff like that. But what if I told you it doesn't have to be that way? What if I told you there's a way to skip all of that drama with the Cologuard test? Now, do I have your attention? The Cologuard test is a one-of-a-kind way to feel more in control of your colon cancer screening through a prescription-based test with none of the prep that's required of a colonoscopy. It's the only FDA-approved, non-invasive test that looks for both altered DNA and blood in your stool, which can indicate the presence of abnormal cells. What I want our listeners to know is that even if you eat well and have a healthy lifestyle, that does not mean that you are low risk for colon cancer. The good news is that when caught at the early stages, colon cancer can be survivable in 90% of people, so screening and early detection are crucial. With zero downtime, no special preparation, and a screening test that's delivered right to your door, we shouldn't let our health take a backseat. I mean, this test costs $0 for most insured patients. What are you waiting for? So if you're 45 or older and at average risk, ask your healthcare provider about screening for colon cancer with the Cologuard test. You can also request a Cologuard prescription today at Cologuard.com/podcast. The Cologuard test is intended to screen adults 45 and older at average risk for colorectal cancer. Do not use a Cologuard test if you have had adenomas, have inflammatory bowel disease, and certain hereditary syndromes, or a personal or family history of colorectal cancer. The Cologuard test is not a replacement for colonoscopy in high-risk patients. Cologuard test performance in ages 45 to 49 is estimated based on a large clinical study of patients 50 and older. False positives and false negatives can occur. Cologuard is available by prescription only.
Want more from your favorite Lemonada Media podcasts while supporting the shows that help make life suck less? Subscribe to Lemonada Premium today. As a subscriber, you'll unlock exclusive bonus content like never-before-heard interviews, behind-the-scenes moments, bonus episodes, and so much more. It's easy to sign up no matter what podcast app you use. On Apple, you can just click the Lemonada logo in the Apple Podcast app and hit subscribe. For all other podcast apps, head to lemonada.supportingcast.fm to subscribe. That's lemonada.supportingcast.fm.